I never noticed it before, not really. But that night it was impossible to ignore. The laughter just a little too long. The way her eyes lingered on him when she thought no one was watching. The way my husband looked at me, searching for something he didn't even realize he'd lost yet. It was just another Friday night. A casual dinner at our place, the kind we had a dozen times before. A couple of drinks, good food, easy conversation. He was there, of course. Our friend, someone who had been part of our lives for years. Did it have felt normal? It didn't. I played my part, smiling, nodding, adding little comments where needed, but I felt like an outsider in my own home. My husband was relaxed, laughing at a joke I barely heard while I watched them from across the table. She leaned in slightly, her fingers resting against the stem of her wine glass, eyes bright with amusement. And then it happened. He said the wrong name. A tiny slip, almost nothing. But it sent a sharp current through the room, something unspoken tightening in the air. She covered it fast, laughed it off, playfully nudging his arm. "Oh God, I'm so tired," she sighed, shaking her head. My husband chuckled, brushing it aside. But I saw it. The flicker of something on his face. Something small, something easy to dismiss. But it was there. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I was slipping into bed when I heard it. The soft glow of a phone screen in the dark. A message. He stirred beside me, half asleep, mumbling something incoherent, but I stayed still, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She typed quickly, her face dimly lit by the screen. And then just as fast, the phone disappeared beneath her pillow. A second later, she rolled over, pressing against me like nothing had happened. I closed my eyes, but the feeling remained, like I was standing at the edge of something, seconds away from a fall. It started with the smallest things, details I would have never questioned before. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to her jacket, something floral, something expensive, something that wasn't hers. A delicate bracelet around her wrist, one I had never seen before, one she never mentioned buying. When I asked about it, she just laughed, said it was a gift from a friend, brushed it off like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. She started coming home later than usual, slipping through the door with a glow on her face, a lightness in her step, like the weight of the day had been lifted the moment she walked in. When I asked where she had been, she'd say, "Oh, just out with the girls," her voice smooth, effortless, like a script she had rehearsed 100 times. Then I found the receipts. Restaurants we never went to, dinners for 2 bottles of wine that cost more than I would ever spend. One night her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, at least that's what she said. She stepped onto the balcony, lowering her voice, but I still heard it. "No, it's fine. He doesn't suspect anything." The house was alive with laughter, music, conversation blending into a comfortable hum. I was caught in some meaningless talk about sports, nodding at the right moments, pretending to care. But then I noticed she was gone. One minute she was beside me, smiling, sipping her drink, the next she had vanished. I scanned the room, the kitchen, the hall, but she wasn't there. Something pushed me outside, the crisp night air hitting my skin as I stepped onto the dimly lit patio. Then I saw them. She stood close to him, too close, her body angled toward his, like they were in the middle of something they didn't want interrupted. Their voices were low, tense, words just out of reach. He reached up, his fingers brushing against her face, tracing her cheek, his thumb lingering at her jawline. She didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't push him away. I turned before I could see more, before my mind could go somewhere it shouldn't. I never saw what happened next. I never saw the way she leaned in, the way their lips met in the quiet dark. But I should have. Something had shifted. She wasn't cruel, she wasn't distant in a way that could be called out, but she was different. Her laughter came less often, her touch felt forced, like she was playing a role she wasn't fully committed to anymore. She sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her lips curving into soft, private smiles, the kind she used to save for me. When I asked what was so funny, she locked the screen, stretched, said she was just tired, that I was reading too much into things. I wasn't. I felt it. One night at the bar I ran into him. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, grinned, acted like everything was fine, like there was no reason for my stomach to tighten at the sight of him. I wanted to believe it. But later at home, as I poured myself a drink, I heard her voice from the bedroom, hushed, urgent. "I can't just leave like that. It's not that simple." The words sliced through me, sharp, undeniable. I stood there, glass frozen halfway to my lips, listening, knowing, sinking. I wanted to fix it, to pull her back before she drifted too far. So I planned something special. Nothing extravagant, just something to remind us of who we used to be. A quiet dinner, candles flickering, her favorite wine poured into glasses we hadn't used in months. When she walked in, she hesitated, eyes scanning the setup like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, setting her bag down, forcing a smile. "But I did. I needed to." We ate, we talked, but something was missing, like a note played slightly off-key. She laughed at the right moments, reached for my hand, but her touch felt careful, rehearsed. After dinner, I pulled her close, pressed my lips against hers, hoping she'd melt into me, hoping I'd feel the same fire I used to. She kissed me back, but it was different. Softer, distant, like she was holding something back. And for the first time I felt it, truly felt it. There was someone else between us, silent, unseen, but there. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The feeling wouldn't leave me. It crept into every quiet moment, every glance, every pause in conversation that stretched a little too long. One night, while she was in the shower, I reached for her phone. I had never done it before, never felt the need. But when I pressed the screen, the lock screen had changed. A new password. My stomach twisted. He never changed it. I put it down just as she walked in, hair damp, wrapped in a towel. "Looking for something?" she asked, eyebrow raised, amusement flickering in her eyes. I forced a chuckle, said I was just moving it. Later, when I asked her outright if something was wrong, if there was anything she wasn't telling me, she just laughed. "You're acting weird," she said, shaking her head. "My best friend told me to stop digging unless I was ready for what I'd find. Maybe he was right. But then she told me she was going away for the weekend with her friends. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Until my friends saw her across town, stepping into a car that wasn't hers, with someone who wasn't me. I told myself I wouldn't do it, that I wasn't that kind of man, but when she said she had errands to run before her trip, I found myself behind the wheel, following at a safe distance. My pulse hammered as I watched her pull into a parking lot, scanning the area like she was making sure no one was watching. Then he arrived. He didn't hesitate, didn't check his surroundings, he just walked up, smiled, placed a hand on her back as they stepped inside a quiet little cafe. I parked across the street, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. They sat by the window, their conversation easy, her face lit with an expression I hadn't seen in months. I needed proof, but before I could act, they left separately, careful, calculated. That night, over dinner, I mentioned the cafe casually, watching for a reaction. Her fork paused midair before she laughed, brushing it off. But her hands trembled when she picked up her glass. He, on the other hand, met my gaze across the table, unreadable, unfazed. That's when my best friend leaned in, whispering, "Man, you're not yourself anymore." And he was right. I wasn't supposed to be home yet. She thought she had more time. I parked down the street, heart pounding, forcing myself to breathe as I unlocked the door. The house was quiet but not empty. Laughter drifted from the bedroom, low, intimate, the kind of sound that made my stomach twist. My body moved before my mind could catch up. Down the hall, each step heavier than the last. I pushed the door open. My mother had been too distracted to put it away. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached for it, fingers clenching the fabric. Footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, breath hitching the second she saw me. A flicker of panic quickly masked. "You're home early," she said, voice too light, too casual. She crossed the room before I could speak, hands sliding to my face, lips pressing against mine. Desperate. Distracting. But her touch felt wrong, her kiss tasted like guilt. And in that moment I knew, I had been right all along. And somehow that hurt more than not knowing. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even look ashamed. She just exhaled like a weight had finally lifted and said it, plain, cold, final. "I haven't been happy for a long time." The words hit harder than I expected. Not just because of what they meant, but because I had spent so long convincing myself that we were fine. That I could fix this. That if I just held on a little tighter, she wouldn't slip away. But the truth was, she had been gone long before I noticed. I sat there, staring at nothing, the air thick with something suffocating. When I finally looked at him, he didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't offer apologies or excuses. He just met my eyes, steady, certain, as if daring me to do something about it. My best friend was right. None of this had been worth it. The late nights, the doubt, the paranoia. I had lost myself chasing a lie. And yet, even knowing that, I couldn't just walk away. Not yet. Not when everything I had ever believed in had just crumbled at my feet. I walked out without a word. No screaming, no pleading, no last attempt to make her stay. Just silence, thick and final as I closed the door behind me. The cold air hit my skin but it didn't clear my head. Nothing would. I had lost. Not just her, not just the life I thought we had. I had lost myself somewhere along the way. Weeks blurred into months. I told myself I was moving on, that time would dull the edges of what she had done, but then I saw her. A different city, a different night, but with the same man. She was laughing, head tilted back, eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. She looked new, weightless, like she had never known me at all. Like I had been nothing more than a passing phase in a life that had finally begun now that I was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw her name, felt my breath catch. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering. Then I let it ring, watched as the call faded into silence. And for the first time I knew, this was the end.